Hello, bookworms. I'm so excited to come today and talk to you about my newest book coming out tomorrow, July 31st, 2026. The name of the book is Summer of Grace. It is book one in a brand new series that I'm launching. The series title is Seasons of Grace. And as you might have guessed, that is suggesting that there's more coming, and there absolutely are. This one is called Summer of Grace. The next one will be set in the autumn of hope. The third one is set in the winter, not sure of the title quite yet. And then the fourth, which will wrap up everything, will be set in the spring. Again, I have something for brothers apparently. My first series, Haven, had four brothers. They each got a book, and I'm continuing that in this next series. I want to introduce you to the Williams family. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of background, a little bit of insight into how this book came about. I get asked all the time, how do you come up with your ideas? And my problem is I have so many that I know I will never get all of these books written. So now I have to start triaging, which isn't very fun. So that's for another time. So the Williams family, I had my first series set in Haven, which, as you know, is on the coast of Maine. Everyone, when they think of Maine, they think of the coast. They think of the rocks and the shoreline and the lighthouses and the ocean, and it is gorgeous. Don't get me wrong. I love the ocean. I love the waves. I love everything about it. Well, maybe not the sand, but that's again it doesn't have to be about me, right? I just want to write what I think people are going to enjoy reading. But I know, because I've been a lifelong Maine resident, there is much more to our great state than just the coastline. So I wanted to introduce readers to what is beyond that. And that brought me into the mountains of Maine. Now, I lived in the mountains of Maine for quite some time. My husband grew up there. It is the western part of the state. And once you reach a certain point, there's nothing beyond. So let me give you an example. My husband grew up in a small little tiny town called Emden, named after a town in England, of course, because what isn't in England, New England named after England? It's a very, very small town. You blink and you miss it. Most people, when we tell them about Emden, they're like, where is that again? It is near the Appalachian Trail. It is a very, very tiny town. And when we lived there, I think we grew the population from 500 to roughly 505 when we moved onto our piece of property. And we had to drive, depending on which direction we came in, anywhere from a mile to 3 miles on dirt roads to get to our home. When I say it's in the middle of nowhere, I was always hesitant to invite people to our home because it literally felt like it was in the middle of the nowhere. I would tell them drive until the pavement ends and then keep driving a little bit further. But it was the perfect place to raise our children. And we have the added benefit is that is his family's property, and that is where he grew up. That's where his parents still live. And so the year we were married, 33 years ago, this month actually, just last week, we celebrated 33 years of marriage. And the summer we were married, I actually worked as a reservationist for a whitewater rafting company in the Western Mountains of Maine. And I really had no idea what I was doing. I've worked as a secretary before. I had the right skill set. And so when I worked there, they really wanted everyone to go down the river. The river's called the Kennebec, at least one of the rivers. There's three in Maine that most people raft. One is called the Kennebec. The Dead River is also nearby. And then the Penobscot is also not too far away. And those are the three rivers. I went down the Kennebec. Now, I should also preface that by saying I am not a water person. I don't like water. I can barely swim. Uh, that harkens back to an incident when I was very young, and it gave me a fear of water that unfortunately has lasted quite a bit in my life. Yet peer pressure is a wonderful thing, especially when you're only 20 years old. And so I went down the river that day with other staff members. I was pretty sure I was going to die. And I knew if I fell out of that boat, I would panic and it would not end well. Thankfully, I stayed in the boat, survived, everything was great. They tried to get me to go on the Penobscot. I absolutely refused. I had heard too many stories from the guides as they would come in about rafts flipping as they went through the crib work, what's called the crib work. And I just I couldn't get it brave enough to go down that one. Actually ended up going down the Kennebec a second time because I have a very bossy big sister. If you know, you know. If you have a big sister or big brother that likes to tell you what to do because they love you, and that is that is what happens when they're born first. She came up, wanted to go rafting, and I said, "Absolutely, I can get you set up, no problem." And she goes, "No, no, no, I want you to go with me." No, I'm not going down the river again. I've done it once. I'm good. She goes, no, 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 we have to do this together. And so we did it together. And I survived my second run down the river, although I swear it was a near thing. I almost floated right out of the boat. Again, it was just one of those things, not something I ever think I'm going to do again. However, all of that to say, it stuck with me. Whitewater rafting is one of those things that you either love it or you never want to go. It's adrenaline building. There's just something about that industry that I think is so cool. So I decided that this next series, I was going to base it around a whitewater rafting company. Now, I will put out a little disclaimer that I did loosely base my Pine Valley Outfitters on the company I worked for. Um, but I did change, obviously, the name of it. It's Pine Valley Outfitters. I changed the name of the river. So instead of the Kennebec, it is the Abnaki. Abnaki is an Indian term. We have a lot of those here in Maine. So it's the Abnaki River. I even renamed all of the rapids themselves. So the the put in spot. I talk about that in the book where all the rafts go in. Uh, in Maine, it's called Harris Dam Station. I changed it to Thunder Gate Station. So just little literary license there. I did change some things up. But if you have ever been down the Kennebec River on a whitewater rafting excursion, I hope you can kind of feel it, see it a little bit better. I did try to bring in all of those moments that I remember from whitewater rafting. Now, again, I only did it twice. I'm in no way an expert in this industry at all. So, thankfully, I do have a friend who is an expert in this industry. And so I sat down almost 2 years ago and interviewed Liz Caruso. Thank you so much, Liz. You helped make this so authentic. And even after I had the first draft written, I was stuck on a point like, what would make someone angry on the river? Like, everyone's so happy when they're on the river. What would make you angry? And she gave me a number of different scenarios. And you're going to see that in a minute because I'm actually going to read to you chapter 1 of Summer of Grace in a few minutes. But she was in just such a great resource for me. So anything that doesn't sound quite right, if you are familiar with the industry, that is just things that I needed to change so that those of you who are reading it who have never been whitewater rafting, have no clue what a guide stick might be or anything else, can enjoy and understand the story. So I did change up a few things as we went along. But this story, I want to tell you about the story. This story has been a long time in the making. Like I said, I interviewed Liz 2 years ago, fully intending to write this story pretty much as soon as I was done with that conversation with her. But then life happened, and I was invited to speak at a homeschool conference. I was a homeschool mom for 20 years before my kids had the audacity to grow up on me. I don't know what they were thinking. And I decided I wanted to write a book about my homeschool experience so that I would have something at the conference. So I set aside all of my regular publishing plans and took care of that book. Um, and if you've seen any of my other videos, you'll understand this next part. I started publishing in 2020. And when I did, I opted to use a pen name. And shortly after that, I had a number of other Evelyn Graces showing up on Amazon and kind of confusing things some. So I was not sure if people realized what I was writing versus what these other women or writers were writing. So just last year, I opted to add Barry. So Evelyn Grace Barry is my pen name now. My entire first series was written under just Evelyn Grace. And so last year, in order to make that seamless, I did put out a short story collection simply so I could get a book out there and get that pen name going. Um, and so this is the first series that will show up under that Evelyn Grace Barry banner. Now, all of my books can be found at my website under Evelyn Grace Books. That is my brand. That is where everything will live. And so going forward, Evelyn Grace or Evelyn Grace Berry, it's all going to be there. So if you're never sure if an Evelyn Grace book that you're picking up is mine, you can always double check it on my website, evelyngracebooks.com. Now, are you ready? I'm ready. I want to read you chapter 1 of Summer of Grace. Now, this is just me reading. I don't do voices. I just do read-alouds. So we'll see how this goes. Chapter 1, All We've Got, Joe. The river was angry this morning. Joe Williams tightened his grip on the larger extended paddle he used to guide the raft as it pitched hard to the left, cold spray slapping his face. Ahead, the Abnaki River churned through a Class 4 rapid known as Cyclone Corridor, unpredictable even on a good day. Today's high release of water from the dam at Thundergate Station added an extra punch, turning the river into a twisting wall of muscle. "All ahead," he shouted over the roar of the water. The crew responded in sync. Almost. Jerry hesitated, and it cost them. The nose dipped too far and caught the surge sideways. For a second, Joe thought they might save it, but the river had other plans. The raft flipped, dumping him into the water. Cold swallowed him as the world turned white and deafening. Joe surfaced, coughing and sputtering river water. He held onto his paddle with one hand and began swimming toward the raft bobbing in the waves in front of him. The four heads of the other guides popped up within seconds. Rachel was already moving fast toward Jerry, who looked stunned, but upright in his life jacket. "Grab the raft!" Joe yelled, kicking hard toward the overturned boat. Mike reached it first. Joe wasn't far behind, adrenaline driving him forward. The two men quickly swam the raft toward the riverbank, where the water was calmer. They quickly righted it. Joe tossed his paddle over the side and pushed himself up and over the tube, tumbling into the bottom. Mike quickly followed. Joe knelt in the raft, scanning the water for the other two guides. Suddenly, a yellow kayak appeared upstream, moving fast. "Hey, swimmers!" Joe yelled, waving one arm overhead. The kayaker didn't stop, didn't even acknowledge Joe's call to be on the lookout for people in the water. He just carved a clean line through their formation, coming close enough to Jerry that it looked like he might have clipped his helmet. "Dude, people are in the water. Those aren't rocks." Joe's anger boiled up. The kayaks vanished around the bend in the river, ignoring Joe and the other rafters in the boats or out of them. His brother Noah's crew reached for the last two guides still in the water. They extended the T-grip of their paddles out to them and hauled them toward their raft. Rachel and Jerry grabbed the ropes looped along the edge, and the crew soon towed them closer to Joe's boat. "Everyone good?" Noah called. "Yeah," Joe glared after the kayak. "We're good." He never took his eyes off the bend where the yellow kayak had disappeared. "Any idea who that was?" "While on the river, you stop for people in the water. It was how things worked up here. Help was too far away to take chances." The kayaker hadn't even bothered to check. Noah shot him a look, his hand still steady on his own guide paddle. "Hate to say it, but I'm pretty sure he works for Taggart." Of course he did. Joe's anger deepened. Bill Taggart from Abnaki River Runners had been circling like a vulture for 2 seasons now. He'd made it quite clear he wanted to buy out Pine Valley Outfitters. Joe's grip flexed on his paddle. 3 generations of Williams had run the company. No chance that was going to change now. Taggart could try all he wanted. Joe turned to where Mike was helping Jerry into the raft. The younger man winced as his knee bumped the edge of the tube. "You good?" Joe called. "Yeah, just banged it on a rock. I'll ice it back at the lodge." He rubbed it, a grimace on his face. Thankfully, they had all kept a tight hold on their paddles. Their training had held. The pressure in Joe's chest didn't ease. They were halfway through training week, and opening day loomed. They needed another clean run today if they had any chance of getting the new guides up to speed for the season. Joe scanned the water once more, then turned forward. They still had 4 rapids ahead, including Mystic Falls, the narrow drop that rattled even seasoned guides. "Everyone good to keep going?" he called back. Rachel gave a thumbs up from her position beside Jerry. Noah's crew of 4 guides mirrored the gesture. Joe repositioned his raft and called to his crew. "All ahead!" The guides dug in their paddles, and they were soon back in the middle of the river, heading for the next rapid. A quick glance behind him showed Noah and his boat were following. They hit the remaining rapids with more focus. Joe barked out commands, watching each person in his raft, each paddle stroke. Jerry kept going despite the banged-up knee. He had to give the new guide credit. He had grit. When they reached the bottom of Mystic Falls, the raft slammed hard into the current, but they stayed upright. At least they weren't swimming the falls today. That would happen tomorrow. The last whitewater section faded behind them, replaced by a wide, steady stretch of river that wound through the forest like a mirror. A kingfisher cut across the water ahead of them, and somewhere in the alders a red-winged blackbird was making itself known. Even though Joe's pulse slowed, the incident with the kayaker kept playing through his mind. The crew paddled quietly for a while as they settled into an easy rhythm. During the season, they would let the guests use inflatable kayaks on the stretch, or even float down the river in their life jackets. But not today. There was no time during training to truly enjoy the slower parts of the river. Training week was Joe's favorite time on the river. He enjoyed teaching new guides how to read the river, how to tell if a hole would hold you or spit you out, how to spot which line to take through the waves. The amount of water released from the dam made every single day on the river different. But this year, none of that came easy. Between his parents leaving for the summer and the debt hanging over the business, his focus kept slipping. Taggart's antics didn't help. He shoved the thought aside. They still needed to do another run today, so they pushed hard to get to the takeout point. They'd take a break, debrief on what went wrong and why they flipped the raft, and then do it all over again. By the time they reached the takeout, Joe's muscles were aching. Jerry was rubbing his leg, while Rachel kept glancing at him. The team had made it, though, even if they were a little bruised. The raft bumped against the shore. Joe swung his legs over the side and landed in the mud near the shore with a squelch as his river sandals sank into the soft ground. "You sure you're okay?" Joe asked Jerry. Jerry winced as he put weight on the leg. "I've had worse." He grinned even as he limped his way to the shore. Rachel came alongside him. "Let me at least wrap it until we get back to the lodge." Joe didn't wait to hear more. He stalked to the Gare trailer, yanked open the back latch, and shoved his waterlogged throw bag inside. He ran a hand through his wet hair and snatched a towel off the hook, rubbing it dry. They needed the season to go perfectly. It seemed Taggart wasn't going to allow that to happen. Someone from that man's crew had gone through without stopping when Joe had clearly called out he had people in the water. Pine Valley was a remote location. The nearest hospital was an hour away. Up here, they looked out for each other, even more so on the river. It was just one more thing to add to his long list of issues he had with Taggart. He had shown up in Pine Valley 3 years ago, an outsider. In that short time, he'd bought out two other struggling outfitters, turning them into Abnaki River runners. Now it looked like he had his sights set on Pine Valley outfitters. Larry Dunlap tried to warn him last year. The man had been ashamed to admit how he had overextended during COVID and was on the verge of bankruptcy when Taggart had shown up. A cash offer on the table was too good to pass up. Joe wouldn't let that happen to his family business. Pine Valley had been in his family for 3 generations, and it was going to stay there. He'd see to it. Noah approached quietly, standing beside Joe without saying anything at first. "That guy in the kayak had some nerve," he finally muttered. "Do you think it was an accident?" He leaned in, keeping his voice low so no one would overhear. "I don't know. But anyone who's ever been on the Abnaki knows how things work out here. He should have slowed, moved out and away. Heck, he could have towed Rachel or Jerry out of the middle of the river." Joe shook his head. "No, he knew what he was doing and didn't care. We both know Taggart does nothing by accident." Noah exhaled slowly. "That's not the same as saying he sent someone out there on purpose. What would be the end goal?" "I have no idea. The timing sat wrong with him. They'd been the last group slated to go down the river today. Granted, anyone could be out on the water whenever they wanted." He dragged a hand through his damp hair again. "Maybe it's nothing, but with everything happening with the business lately, and now Mom and Dad about to leave to scout out their retirement options, we need the season to go well." His brother exhaled. "You think this place asks too much of us?" He gave a shrug. "Doesn't matter. We're all it's got." "That's not actually an answer, you know." Joe stared at him. "It's our legacy, Noah. We can't let it go. Not without a fight." "We might not have a choice," he said simply. His brother turned to help load the rafts onto the trailer, leaving Joe standing there with the echo of his own words. Except there was always a choice. Did Noah want off the river? He thought his brothers wanted the same thing he did, and that was for Pine Valley outfitters to last to the next generation. The summer season hadn't even started, and already he felt like the whole thing rested on his shoulders. 20 minutes later, the gear was loaded, and the crew was piling into trucks and vans. Joe offered to drive the older Sprinter van solo. He needed to cool off before they headed back down the river this afternoon. Halfway back, he pulled off at a small scenic overlook at the bend in the river. It was the last one before he arrived back at the lodge. He often stopped here when he needed a quiet moment to think. The van engine ticked in the silence as he stepped out and leaned against the hood, arms crossed. The Abnaki flowed quietly, contained within its boundaries. He could clearly see the other bank, and often saw a deer, and on rare occasions a moose coming to grab a drink. He stared out over the river, mind blank for a few blissful moments, until all that Pine Valley Outfitters was dealing with pushed its way to the forefront. The past few years had nearly broken the business. He understood that. Between COVID closures, a dip in winter tourism, and Taggart breathing down their necks, it hadn't been easy to keep going. But understanding and accepting it were two different things. It shouldn't have come as a surprise when his parents had sat down with him and his brothers to tell them this was their make or break season. It was, anyway. The debt they'd taken on to keep the doors open needed to be repaid. Interest was eating into the margins. The number they needed to hit this season seemed out of reach. While his mind understood what his parents had said about not wanting to saddle their sons with a failing business, Joe struggled with the thought of Pine Valley Outfitters ceasing to exist after this summer season. He'd grown up believing he would one day run the company and raise his family here, just like his parents had done. He was certainly going to do everything he could to make sure that happened. Then his parents had really given him a shock. They'd hired an outsider to come in and work the business with him this summer as a co-manager. They wanted, as his mother had said, fresh eyes to look at everything and see if there was any way to solidify what they had. Joe had tried not to growl at the thought of having to run everything he did by someone else this summer, and someone he wasn't even related to. His mother had reached across and covered Joe's hand with hers. "We trust you completely. That's not what this is. We just want someone who isn't in love with the place the way we are to make sure we're not handing you a sinking ship." Joe had nodded and said the right things. At least he thought he had. But sitting across from his parents, his heart had sunk, thinking about Pine Valley Outfitters needing help he couldn't give it. Now, some guy named Sam from Summit Strategy Group was coming. Someone who didn't know Pine Valley, who didn't understand what it meant to carry a weight on your back for years, only to have people suggest you're doing it all wrong. Someone who certainly didn't understand families stuck together no matter what. He shifted his weight and blew out a slow breath, the scent of damp pine surrounding him. Let Sam come. He'd survive it. Pine Valley would survive it. He'd make sure of it. So I hope that gets you a little excited about the book that is releasing tomorrow, July 31st, 2026. It will be available on Amazon, and it is also going to be enrolled in Kindle Unlimited. Plus, if you happen to live locally to me, copies will be at Berry Fruit Farm in a couple weeks once I receive them here. So I hope you enjoyed Summer of Grace, and you'll get to meet Joe and Samantha, or Sam. I guess we'll find out. Thank you so much for listening. See you later.